My idea to advance sustainability is algae-powered buildings, living green structures. My project idea. My project idea involves using the aquatic plant algae to power our buildings. As an interior design major, I think creating efficient and sustainable architecture is key to improving sustainability. Algae is one of the fastest growing organic materials, and if used for our buildings, the algae would reduce our carbon footprint immensely. Algae will be placed on the outside of our buildings, and as the sun shines throughout the day, the algae would grow, generating biomass and heat. The buildings would then be able to power themselves from the algae biofuel, and the biofuel would be stored and used for any power need in the future. The algae would also be able to absorb CO2 and shade the interior from the sun. This project would be at a business level, eventually making all types of buildings algae powered, anything from houses and schools to corporate buildings and grocery stores. What problem will it solve? The problem it will solve is reducing energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. By reducing our need for energy and greenhouse gases our buildings usually produce, we would thus reduce our carbon footprint. According to the EPA, in 2018, 26.9% of greenhouse gas emissions came from electricity and heat production. 22% came from industry, primarily fossil fuels burned at facilities for energy. 12.3% came from commercial and residential buildings due to burning fuels for heat and the handling of waste. Overall, 76% of greenhouse gas emissions came in the form of carbon dioxide. Since 1990, greenhouse gas emissions have increased by 3.7%. CO2 emissions have increased as well from 2017 to 2018. This increase was a combination of various factors, including increased energy use for heating and cooling inside buildings. So if we are able to switch to algae-powered buildings, we can immensely reduce the amount of energy that we need to do this inside of buildings. Algae will be able to remove carbon at a pretty fast rate as well. 1 kilogram of algae will remove 1.87 kilograms of CO2 per day. This is significantly better than a maple tree that would take 1 acre of 25-year-old maples to remove 2.18 kilograms of CO2 per day. Will algae-powered buildings solve the problem completely? The algae-powered buildings won't be able to completely solve this issue, since greenhouse gas emissions come from other things as well, but it is a step in the right direction. Algae-powered buildings also have the potential to reduce energy costs down to zero for the buildings they power when paired with other renewable resources that we already have. What changes and investments will be needed? A way to keep the algae alive and well to produce energy for the buildings will be needed, and a good investment would be photobioreactors. Photobioreactors are artificial growth chambers that control temperature, pH, and nutrient levels to keep algae alive longer. The problem with these is that they are too expensive to produce at a large scale right now for all the buildings we would need them for. More research and investment financially would be needed to use these for buildings at a large scale. More research would also be needed to understand what type of algae would be best suited for powering buildings, since there is a lot of different species and types of algae. Has this idea been done before? This idea has been done before in the Biointelligent Quotient, also known as the BIQ. The BIQ is an algae-powered building located in Hamburg, Germany, and has been running for a little over a year. This building has 129 bioreactor louver panels that are 0.78 inches thick and cover 200 square meters of this building. These panels are filled with algae and essential nutrients to allow the algae to live easily. When the sunlight hits these bioreactors, the algae multiplies and gives off heat that is captured and stored in tanks underground. Algae biomass is produced and harvested at this time as well, and it can be converted to biogas or used for secondary pharmaceutical and food products. The image on the right explains a little bit more about this process. The building is producing a lot more heat than initially thought by the cult group who is monitoring this building. The algae inside the panels are also taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, and each square meter of panel on this building reduces 8 tons of carbon emissions per year. This building currently reduces outside energy needs by 50%, and the architects that created this building say 100% is achievable when paired with solar panels. The solar panels that we would pair with this building would power the pumps and heat exchangers to capture the heat from the algae, making the building completely self-sustaining for energy. The main issue is that a building like this will require $2,500 per square meter. However, buildings like these all over the world would significantly decrease our need for fossil fuels for energy and lower our carbon footprint. A similar concept is being used in an ongoing project in Shanghai, China, a floating algae farm that recycles CO2 for a biohydrogen airship. This is one of the first biomimicry projects designed by an architect named Vincent Callaway. The hydrogenase is a floating algae farm that is able to absorb CO2 as a main nutrient and create usable energy in bioreactors. The farms can be used anywhere in the world since they do not compete with areas where food is grown or where forests are. According to the Vincent Calabay architects who made these floating farms, these floating algae farms would be able to produce 120 times more biofuels than a hectare of colza, soya, or sunflower and would not produce any greenhouse gas emissions. These floating farms aren't exactly like a building, but I think the idea of these aquatic plants being able to produce more biofuels than other resources we have discovered shows how efficient they can be, especially when translated to buildings. I think if we translate these to buildings, like my idea and the BIQ, our buildings would tremendously help with the greenhouse gas emissions our buildings cause now because of all the energy that they use.